Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Christianity Podcast. In this video, we're going to be investigating the key to understanding the parables of Jesus.
Going where I am, from here, from where I am to where I'm going. Going where I am, from here to who I am, from where I've been. Going where I am.
Well, what is the key to understanding the parables of Jesus? Well, the answer lies in a parable itself. There's one sort of master key or master parable, and that parable is the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower is mentioned three times in the Gospels. It's on three different books or occasions or Gospels. It's mentioned. But where it shows that it's the key is found in Mark 4:13, which reads, "And he said unto them, Know you not this parable? And how then will you know all parables?" So you see that this one, the way Jesus is laying this parable out, and the reason why so many of the gospel writers, record it, is because it's key. And we're going to look at how is that so? How is it the key parable to understand the other parables? In the parable of the sower, we see four kinds of soil, and that's really represents four kinds of people. And I think that we see that theme throughout the entire Bible. The number four represents like the north, south, east, west, the four directions. But it really represents also four destinies of men. We see that in Revelation 22:11, where Jesus at the very end of the Bible lays out the four different destinies or the four kinds of people. In this case, the four kinds of soil that the word is received in. The first time we see the four directions that we can take goes all the way back to Genesis 2 with the four rivers that flow out of Eden. So let's look at the four different kinds of soil and how that word is received. We begin in Matthew 13, verse 18, which reads, "Hear you therefore the parable of the sower." And verse 19, "When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and understands it not, then comes the wicked one and catches away that which was sown in his heart. This is he which receives seed by the wayside." Here we see basically what an unbeliever is, like what we call an unbeliever from a Christian perspective. We would say, well, this person is an unbeliever. They refuse to receive the seed, the good seed, the seed of the kingdom, the seed of the gospel. They refuse it. And so therefore it doesn't go into their heart whatsoever. And the birds of the air come in and take it away. It falls on the wayside. It doesn't lead to a walk in the path of righteousness or the path of holiness. The next one, "But he that receives the seed in stony places, the same is he that receives the word, and anon with joy receives it. Yet has he no root in himself, but lasts only for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arise because of the word, by and by he is offended." So we see here, this is an important one to understand, the rocky soil. It represents the shallow conversion. And at other places it says, like in Mark 4:5, it says, and it had no depth of earth. We also see that a person, when the gospel is preached and it's received with selfish intent by the outer man or by the part of us that really needs to go to the cross, the part of us that's selfish, that has its defense mechanisms, what I have talked about in earlier videos about the outer man. When it's received on that level, what happens is it doesn't go any further. It never gets to the inner man because the outer man grabs that salvation for himself. So it never gets to its intended, the inner man, the inner part of the heart. It never sinks that far. It's the intended part that God is trying to reach. So we see this in other parables. We see this with the burying of the talent. Like in the parable of the talents, this would be a key to understanding the wicked servant that buried his talent. How did he bury his talent? Well, what he did was he didn't allow it to go, or he hid it, but the outer man, he was hiding it. Oh, he was hiding it in his inner man, his outer man. And so that way it never sank all the way in and it didn't bear fruit. And also his outer man never got out of the way. So it was always the outer man that was running the show, and therefore he bore no fruit. Next, we have the thorny soil. And that's in verse 22. We continue. And he that receives seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. So here we see in another parable or another story of Jesus, not a parable in this case, the story of the rich young ruler who was very rich, and he had too much to lose in a way to follow Jesus at that appropriate level. It doesn't mean he wasn't a good man. It doesn't mean that he didn't obey the commandments. Actually, when he asked, like, Lord, what must I do to be saved? It's funny that Jesus doesn't say, you need to believe in me. He said, you need to obey the commandments. And so he said, I've done since my youth. But if you would be perfect. So this is a call to bear eternal fruit. And he's not able to bear eternal fruit because he's got too many cares in this world. And also, there's also even just righteous people who love their families, people who love others, who look after others. They tend to get caught up like the Martha. They tend to get caught up with worldly affairs, even if it's a good thing, but they're not able to bear an eternal fruit. Or as it says in Luke 8:14, which is another citation of this same parable, it says, they bear no fruit to perfection. So it's not that they bear no fruit at all. It's not that they bear, how would I say, they don't bear like any righteous fruit, or what they're doing isn't good. It's just that it's not on a scale of holiness. It doesn't fit because it's not a perfect fruit. Therefore, we have to understand that all these parables are from a holiness perspective. They're from a kingdom perspective. And they're not something that we can judge for ourselves. We can only look at them in comparison with the others. And finally, we have the good soil, the fourth kind of way of receiving the gospel or the word or the kingdom message. And that is, it's in verse 23 of Matthew 13. But he that receives seed into the good ground is he that hears the word and understands it, and also bears fruit, bringing forth some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. In the case of the good soil, what we see is someone who's getting out of the way. They're not impeding what God wants to do with them. In other words, they're not judging from themselves. They're not looking for advantage. They're not taking the word selfishly, as Jesus said, those who seek to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for his sake will find it. These are people that have learned to be selfless, the way God is selfless, the way Christ is selfless. And this is where the fruit comes from. It comes from a selflessness, and it comes from the Lord working through us as a conduit of God's goodness into the world. The saints are of this group. The first group that we read is about those that receive the seed by the wayside. Those are the unbelievers. But the next three kinds of soil are all believers. I know a lot of people will react against that or not believe that for a second, but you really have to understand what's going on and the message that Jesus is giving it to us in the Bible. The first group are those that are like the Pharisees. They receive things, but they claim things that aren't theirs. And as soon as the shallow soil is offended, as soon as the word is presented in a way that doesn't fit with their own self-interest, they immediately balk. They feel offended, it says, because they have no depth of soil. So therefore, rather than reaching out by faith and repenting, what they do is they double down. Does it mean that they leave the Lord? I would say some do. Some of them get offended and walk away. But many, and especially today in today's church, they don't get offended. They actually double down, and the doctrines are changed to suit them. And this is what we see. The offended ones, in a sense, are catered to by changing the doctrines so that a surface understanding and a surface conversion is acceptable. We have lowered the standard to that degree where those people, maybe in a true church or a true apostolic church, would not be able to last. But we've made it so that because of the desire for numbers and to fill pews and because of financial obligations, we have lowered the standard in the churches so that those people that would have been offended in the past are now retained by changing doctrine, by catering to the flesh. And this is what we see. But this is definitely among the believers, and especially today. So the ones that receive it on the thorny ground, the stony ground, stony places, they're in the church, and we have to be aware of that. And even in ourselves, we have to be wary of how we have received the gospel, and do we get so easily offended? Do we understand that? Can we accept the rebuke? Can we accept the correction of the Bible, or is everything always for our benefit? We have to really look at that. The second group among the believers, the ones that receive the word on thorny soil, are those that really cover a lot of us, especially in a time where there's so many things going on in the world, and the attention that we have towards the world, the interest, the news, the entertainment, all these things, they take away from our ability to really go deeper with the Lord. And I would say that this covers a lot of people, a lot of believers, a lot of Christians. But I would say that many of these are not evil people. They're not evil intended. And I would say that these are among the righteous. Now, this will be controversial if anybody is listening to this that doesn't look at the entire Bible and to look at how these things are measured. And then we compare it to the last group, which is that receiving good soil. We know these are the saints, and the different depths that those things can happen, and for different lengths of time. If a person is a saint for a long time, he's going to produce more fruit than somebody who's a saint only for a short time. So we see the 100-fold, the 60-fold, and the 30-fold. So then, as an overview, we see, and now we know that I split it into the first group, which is the ones that are non-believers. But then among the believers, there are three groups, or there are three categories. And one is the shallow soil, and then the second one is the thorny soil, and then after that's the good soil. So it goes like this. In Jesus's words, in Revelation 22:11, it would be the filthy, and then it would be the righteous, and it would be the saints. The wicked are already done away with. They're part of the part that falls on the wayside, and they have absolutely nothing to do with the word of God and with the kingdom. But we see among the ones that do receive the seed and do receive it, and like even the ones that are shallow receive it with joy at first. In other words, they always come back to if you meet people that are always talking about how they were converted, and their testimony is always about their first conversion, always stuck on the conversion, they're remembering the first joy they had, then there's a big chance that person is receiving it in shallow soil, because you would think after so many years you would have more testimony and a deeper witness than just how you came to know the Lord. And now, among that group, of course, could also be the righteous, the ones that also allowed the word to get choked out. So it's really, we can't judge. It's just up to people to judge themselves and to realize that what God is looking for is holiness. Without holiness, none shall see the Lord. And we have to realize that what the demand of holiness is extreme. It's like it's a huge calling. Like to the rich young ruler, Jesus says, "Sell all you have and follow me. If you would be perfect, and if you would bear eternal fruit, that this is what you would do." But we tend to shy away from the sell all you have part. There's so many times where Jesus say, "Buy from me the eye salve," or it says, "Go to them that sell the oil." And we see that buy and sell it not. Taste and see the Lord is good. We see that these things are throughout the Bible. This idea of buying, buy and sell not. So the idea for us is to take stock of what it is that Jesus is telling us in the parables, and be careful how we fit in, or how we think we fit in. So then, how are there 4 destinies? How does that work? Well, we know that there's 2 resurrections. And so 2 times 2, if we look at each resurrection has a winner and a loser, and which we'll look at a little bit later, a winner and a loser, then that makes 4. There's 4 destinies. There are 2 resurrections, and there are 4 destinies. So 2 times 2. This is not complicated. This is beyond, of course, the more simplistic way of seeing things of heaven and hell. Heaven and hell are not eternal destinations. They're places that exist now. There's the grave, and then there's the hell that's going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And heaven is a place that we enter into now. The time to enter into the kingdom of heaven is now. Heaven is not after you die. Heaven is now. And this is something I think that the difference between a religion of death and a religion of life. A religion of death, or a faith of death, or a belief in death, and the faith of life, is that if you think you only attain heaven after you die, then I call that dead religion. I think the Bible calls it that too, if you look at it very carefully, what it says concerning doing dead works, or following the flesh, or trying to be perfected in the flesh. But then heaven, the faith that we are to have, and the realm that we are to seek is the heavenly kingdom. And it even says, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. Do you really think that we're supposed to seek to die? To show how this parable, the parable of the sower, is a key parable, I want to look at another parable, which is very similar. It's the parable of the wheat and the tares, and how we see that there's more than just two possibilities, that actually there's two levels in this parable of the wheat and tares. So let's look at it. It's also in Matthew 13, and I believe it starts in chapter 36. Then Jesus sent the multitude away, and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. Now he answered and said to them, He that sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil, and the harvest at the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. And it says, and therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire. So shall it be at the end of the world. Now that's the first level. Here you got two different qualities, or two different kinds of people. The ones that are the children of the kingdom, and the ones that are sown there by the devil. They're not devil seed. This idea of the serpent seed or the devil seed is not right. What it means is that the devil maintains control over those who are not the Lord's. But he maintains control over them, but they have a choice. They're not destined to be that way. People choose, in many cases, to be this way. So here we see that there's people that are alive, and there's people that are burned in the fire, and they're done away with. It says they are burned in the fire. It doesn't say they are tortured in the fire. It says they are burned in the fire, and that's the second death. That's the first level. Let's look at the second level, which continues as follows. And verse 41, the Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom. So notice in the first part, the field was the world, but now it's the kingdom. Now, so in other words, you take the first division, and now you've taken away the tares are taken away. But now there's another level here of wheat and tares, as follows. Out of his kingdom, all things that offend, and them which do iniquity. But wait a second, they're still alive here. So in other words, all the tares have already been taken away on that level. Here comes the second division, or what we call a second resurrection, a second judgment. And here it says, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire, there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. But wait a second, it says shall cast them in the furnace of fire. It doesn't say it burns them. And we see that this furnace of fire is in 1 Corinthians 3 when it says that our works will be tested in the fire to see what kind they are. So we will find out the quality of that soil through fire, through testing. And then it goes on and says, then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who has ears to hear, let him hear. So you see that if we're paying attention, we'll see that there's two divisions. Now, what does that mean? Gather out of his kingdom all things that offend. Well, doesn't that sound like those ones that were shallow soil, and the ones that get offended, and the ones that operate out of the outer man and bury their talent? And also, I didn't mention this, but they also rail and attack those that are righteous. They attack the saints. It's those people that turn. Those are the people that turn, like, I guess, like you would say, like Judas. he was converted to Christ, but it was in a shallow way. When it came to serving his self-interest, he betrayed his Lord. And that happens so much. And it's not just one person here and there. We see that there's a whole destiny that's based on this, of shallowness and of getting offended and changing the rules and trying to twist away the meaning or God's design to themselves, to their benefit. I thought I would share a little bit more because I don't think a lot of people understand the four different destinies or the four different kinds of soil or the four directions that we can take. I don't think people understand that very well. But I want to take it back to Deuteronomy 30, verse 15. Listen to this verse. See, I have set before you this day life and good, death and evil. Now, people will say, well, yeah, but that's life and good is one thing, and death and evil is one other thing. It's like, well, no. In the Hebrew, when you want to make something specific, and that's the subject of the sentence, the article, it's you have an et in front of it. For instance, when it's in the first sentence in the Bible, the first verse says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Et hashamayim, the heavens, et haaretz, the earth. Heaven and earth are two separate things. Well, in this particular case, this life and good and death and evil all have an et in front of them. So they are four separate entities. It's not this and that plus this and that. It's this and this and this and this. So it even says it in the Bible, but we tend to read it the wrong way. So this day, life and good and death and evil. And there's a comma. This is the problem with our translations, is they put a comma. There's no comma in the Hebrew. Between life and good, comma, death and evil. No. It's life and good and death and evil. And I'll show you on verse 19, just to finish up this idea. It says, I call heaven and earth. Isn't that funny? We just talked about that. To record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that you and your seed may live. Life and death, blessing and cursing. In this case, it doesn't say et. Here we see more accurately that life and death, that's like the tares where it's on the scale of the world. And then we have blessing and cursing, and this involves the judgment of the house of God. It says, in a great house there are many, there's vessels both of good or vessels of honor and dishonor. And here we see blessing and cursing. Life is for the righteous, blessing is for the saints, and cursing is for the shallow ones, the filthy, the ones that dirty, that claim holiness and claim to be at a depth that they are not at. And therefore, because they bring something unclean into the mix, they put their flesh into the mix, then that's seen as filthy by the Lord. I'd like to finish with this Hebrew verse in the Bible. It's beautiful, and I really am inspired by this one. And it's Shoresh lemata ve'asa feri lema'ela. Take root downward and bear fruit upward. And I put on the bottom of the screen there where that's found. It's found in two places in the Bible. And I just find that that's so important that if we want to go to holiness and if we want to be a saint or we feel called to that, the way up is not to strive upward. I mean, we seek God's face, but in our character, we go downward. We go downward into something that is appropriate to righteousness, that we fear the Lord, that we embrace humility. It says that we need to have, how would he say this, clean hands and a pure heart, but also that he looks on the contrite and the brokenhearted. And we need to look at that we bear fruit or we take root downward. That's our roots, so that when we are given a higher experience of grace and we walk in the kingdom realm, that we're not puffed up and we don't become floaters, that we are anchored into the ground in our humility, so that we actually grow both ways, up and down at the same time, like a tree. Imagine a tree that has no roots, like the second kind of soil we saw, like the rocky soil. It has no root, therefore it falls down when the wind blows, when contrary winds come, when persecution come, the offenses come, and they fall down. So the roots are so important to dig down deeply into the our tap root into the water table, let's say the water table of the Spirit, and we need to grow those roots down so that we can bear fruit upwards. And a tree, when people draw a tree, they always draw the part that's above ground, but there's just as much tree down below as there is above. So we have to see that we're not going to bear any kind of eternal fruit without really a brokenness, really a selfless appraisal of our own lives and our calling. It's selfless. God is selfless. The way of Christ is selfless. But we, in so many cases, are so selfish. We're so willing to grab hold of all the free samples of grace. We're so willing to be saved. But are we willing to be a conduit of God's love into the world? Are we willing to be selfless? Are we willing to say, to not claim? Are we willing actually to be condemned so that our brothers would be saved, rather than claiming to be saved and condemning our brothers, which we find so often, judging others? No, we need to do the opposite of what the world does. We need to not look for advantage. We need not to look for what's beneficial to us. We need to look for what's beneficial to others. And by doing that, we come closer to God's heart, and God uses us. So our blessing is to be with the Lord. It's not to have all these vast promises or all these things we claim. No, it's to be used of God so that we can know God. And that's where the eternal benefit is, and that's where the fruit is. That's all for this video. Oz V'Hadar, strength and honor. Please subscribe and put your likes or your comments below. Thank you, and until next time.
Going we will from here.